American guys talk all the time about their first day they take their kid to a ball game and what a highlight that is in their life. For many Minnesota fathers, it's the first time they take them to a hockey game or take them out on the rink.
Growing up, a lot of kids, their dream was to play for their high school team. And the high school hockey tournament was the biggest thing in the state of Minnesota, very much like Indiana basketball or Texas football. It was certainly the biggest sport, I think, in our state, and it is still today.
When you look at the enthusiasm and how these kids basically year-round can play, I just don't think you can beat it anywhere else.
If hockey is religion in Minnesota, then its church would have to be Mariucci Arena, home of the Golden Gophers. The men's program boasts 5 national championships, 3 of which came under legendary head coach Herb Brooks in the 1970s. The other 2 belong to current head coach Don Lucia, who has continued to build his program by focusing his recruiting efforts in-state. With the exception of goalie Kellen Briggs, every player on this year's roster has Minnesota roots.
It goes back to the days of John Mariucci and certainly Herb Brooks. They made a decision that they're going to recruit the Minnesota kid first. And all of a sudden, kids growing up in the state, people identified with him, they read about him, and then they went on to play at the University of Minnesota. And so that became the attraction. Everybody wanted to play at the U.
You've got 40,000 kids in Minnesota playing hockey at the youth level. You've got another 10,000 playing at the high school level. You don't necessarily need to go outside the state to grab good hockey players.
Case in point is the Gophers' sterling freshman class, led by defenseman Eric Johnson and forward Kyle OKPOSO, both Minnesota natives. Johnson and OKPOSO went 1st and 7th overall in the 2006 NHL draft, but chose to delay the start of their pro careers to play for the Gophers.
Eric Johnson came to these games when he was a little kid, sat right behind the bench. His parents had season tickets, so we're fortunate in that regard that so many of these young hockey players grow up in our state, and their dream is to play at the University of Minnesota.
It really was kind of a no-brainer for me. You know, other schools were looking at me, but I knew in my heart of hearts that it was here I wanted to be.
Here's OKPOSO, 2-on-1, shooting a goal!
It's almost impossible to get a ticket to a Gopher game. They've had season ticket holders that have been in those same seats ever since the building opened up, and there's a waiting list to get in.
It's definitely a thrill to know that, you know, thousands of people from your home state know who you are and are really cheering for you. It's a special thing because I was one of those people in the stands earlier in my life, and I was doing the same thing.
I think people really take an affection to these kids on the University of Minnesota because they're the kid next door. They're the kids from Bloomington and St. Paul and Apple Valley, and I think that's the real appeal that the University of Minnesota has, and why it's so endeared to so many people in the state, because they're our kids.